There is a version of Spain that nobody puts on a poster. No sun-bleached plazas, no terracotta rooftops baking in the heat, no flamingo, no crowds pressing towards the same famous corner. This version is green, dramatically, almost impossibly green. Atlantic cliffs dropping into gray-blue water, fishing villages built into hillsides so steep you wonder how they stay standing, fog that rolls off the ocean and makes everything look like a painting that hasn't dried yet. This is the Costa Verde, the green coast of northern Spain, and it is one of the most beautiful places I've ever pointed a camera at. We came into Santander from the east, and the bay was the first thing I noticed. The Bay of Santander is enormous. The city wraps around it on all three sides, and the light on the water was the kind of soft, diffused Atlantic light that photographers quietly dream about. Most people wait for the sun. In northern Spain, I learned to love the clouds. Overcast Atlantic light spreads evenly across everything. No harsh shadows. No blown-out highlights, no fighting the contrast. It's the closest thing to perfect natural studio light that weather can give you. Stop wishing for only blue skies. Work with what the coast gives you. The beaches around Santander are dramatic in a way that feels more Nordic than Spanish. Playa del Camello, Magdalena's, the Neptune sculpture standing at the edge of the water like it's always been there and always will be. The Magdalena Palace sits on the bluff above the bay, built as a summer residence for the Spanish royal family in the early 1900s. From the right angle, it looks like it grew there naturally, stone and towers rising out of the cliffs above the Atlantic. The Botín Center is the other side of that story, a contemporary arts center designed by Rizal Piano, sitting right on the waterfront, glass and steel and clean lines against the bay. Santander managed to put one of the most celebrated contemporary art buildings in Europe right next to a royal palace, and neither one looks out of place. That kind of visual layering is what I live for as a photographer. In the afternoon, we walked downtown. Pinchos again, because you do not say no to Pinchos in northern Spain. Then the long walk back along the water and the beach to the hotel. We stayed at Sardinero, right next to the casino. We had dinner there with the group one night. The bay going dark outside the windows, the kind of evening that doesn't need to be dramatic to be memorable. On the way to Santillana del Mar, we stopped at the Altamira Museum for a few hours. You can't visit the actual cave anymore. It's closed to the public in order to protect the caves. But the museum built a full replica, close enough that you forget that it's a reproduction. I spent my time admiring the Paleolithic artifacts, flint tools, bone carvings, animal fur clothing, and textiles. I studied the replica cave paintings on the ceiling by people who lived 17,000 years ago, admiring the work of artists from the past. It made me reflect on what it means to be an artist. Not a photographer, not a content creator, an artist. Someone who looked at a cave wall and thought, I need to put something there. I need to leave a mark that says I was here. I saw this, it mattered. That's the same impulse that gets any of us to pick up a camera, a brush, or a pen. It just took 17,000 years to prove it wasn't going anywhere. 30 minutes from Santander is a village that feels like the modern world simply forgot to include it. Santillana del Mar is one of the best preserved medieval towns in Spain. Cobblestone streets, stone facades, standing since the 15th century, almost no traffic, almost no noise. We had 4 or 5 hours there, and I spent a good part of that walking alone. I like the small towns more than the big ones. Santillana del Mar is a perfect example why. There's a torture museum in town. My friends went in, but I didn't. And from what they described afterwards, I'm glad I made that call. Not every piece of history needs to be walked through in person to be respected. What I did instead was walk, slowly, admiring the age of the place, the way the stone holds on to centuries the way it does. Shooting in a medieval village calls for a different pace than shooting in a city. There's no energy to feed off of, no crowds creating movement. The story is in the stillness, the worn stone, the empty street at midday, the light coming through the doorway that's framed that same rectangle of light for 500 years. Slow your pace to match the place. Your images will follow. Avilés was a quick stop. One night, arriving late afternoon, gone again the next morning. I got a handful of photos in the Plaza de España in front of the city hall in that fading light of night. Standing there looking at the beautiful light of the building reminded me of a lesson I know well. Consider always having some sort of tripod with you. It's not a good photo, a color shift with a long exposure. Handheld in the low light because my hands could not hold still long enough for the shutter speed. I've recently found a perfect travel companion for quick, simple shots like this one. I'll include the link below. We stayed at the Hotel Placio and walked through Calle Galiana nearby. It offered rich, deep colors, adding warmth to the building facades. Dinner at Tierra Astur earns its own moment. Traditional Asturian cider poured from a height, the bottle held above the head, the glass at the hip, the cider falling into a thin stream to aerate it before it hits the glass. Part performance, part ritual. Part genuinely delicious. We sat at wooden barrel tables. The whole room smelled like apples and old wood. And then there was Cudillero. I've been to a lot of beautiful places. I say that not to brag, but to give you a baseline. After enough years of travel, you develop a kind of calibration, a sense of what registers as genuinely remarkable versus what's simply pleasant. Cudillero registered as genuinely remarkable within the first 30 seconds of seeing it. The village is built in a curved shape around a horseshoe harbor. Houses stacked on top of each other up both sides of the hill. Everyone painted a different color. At the bottom, the inlet with the lighthouse in the distance and a handful of colorful boats tied up as we came into town. The whole thing looks staged, like someone designed it to be photographed, except it's been there for 1,000 years, with roots that some track back to Viking settlers who sailed down the coast and decided this inlet was the place. I can't argue with their judgment. We only had about 4 hours. I spent most of it walking. I watched as a boy working outside his family restaurant strained to push a cart of boxes up a steep hill all by himself. Nobody rushed to help him. He just kept pushing. That's a fishing village. Everyone works, starting young, and nobody makes a show of it. In a village like Cudillero, the temptation is to photograph everything. The harbor, the streets, the boats, the buildings. But I didn't have enough time to do much. Sometimes a stronger approach is to pick one visual thread and follow it, especially if you're limited on time. I loved the harbor. I also admired the locals and the way they lived on this steep hill that fell like a time capsule. Every image I made seemed to pull me back towards the locals and their lifestyle somehow. Even halfway up the hill as I walked along the narrow, winding streets. Picking a visual thread gives a body of work coherence that a pile of individual shots rarely has. While we were there, a car show was happening. Vintage cars winding through those narrow cobblestone streets up and down the hill, engines echoing off the stone walls. Nobody planned for that. It was just happening, and it was wonderful. I went into a small cafe and ordered a cappuccino. I watched as the woman behind the bar made it, the whole process, unhurried, the way coffee gets made somewhere that has never needed to rush. I just watched and smiled. There's a version of travel photography where you document everything, every meal, every street, every person. I understand the impulse, but the moments I choose not to photograph often stay with me longer than most anything I shoot. The memories, the way you see the things around you, and the emotion you feel in the moment. Sometimes I need to sit and write down my thoughts so I can remember how to connect with the photograph later. And sometimes the connection in that moment becomes more important than a lifeless photo. The place where the woman made me the cappuccino, that's a quiet cafe. The people sitting inside, those are my memories. Not everything needs to be content. Writers come to Cudillero to disappear for a while. Artists too. There's something about the scale of it. Small enough to know every street in the afternoon, beautiful enough to look at it for weeks. That invites that kind of creative retreat. I understood completely why people stay. I would have stayed longer if I could. I would definitely like to go back and spend more time. There were so many photo opportunities, but work came first and our time was limited, so I got what I could get before we had to move on. The Green Coast surprised me more than I expected it to. I thought I was coming to photograph fishing villages, and I did, but what stayed with me was something else. The cave paintings at Altamira, the Cider ritual in Avilés, the boy pulling the cart up the hill without complaint, a woman making coffee in Cudillero with no idea she was doing something worth watching. All of it pointed to the same thing. People have always made things, always found beauty in the ordinary, always left marks that say, I was here. I paid attention. This mattered. That's all any of us are doing with a camera, or a brush, or a pen. We're paying attention. And then we're trying to give it back to someone who wasn't there. Stay ready. That's all. Just stay ready. Next week we head to Santiago, and I wasn't even walking the Camino, but it felt like I was. If you want to explore the Green Coast yourself, tour options are linked in the description below with my travel partner. My free field guide, Stop Shooting, Start Seeing, is also in the description. If you use the code SpainVision, all caps, it's yours for free. Leave a comment if something in this video stayed with you. I read every one. Thank you for being here. Go find the light in your corner of the world, and I'll see you next Friday.